why these are called the Tiffin lectures. And the direct source for that title comes from the primary manuscript, which was found at Meherabad shortly after Baba dropped the body. And on the cover of the manuscript are embossed Thursday Tiffin lectures, gleanings from Sri Baba's own. Now, Thursday, as I mentioned, is Guruvar. That's the Indic word for Thursday, which means Guru's Day. It's associated with the Guru, dedicated to the Guru. And a lot of people would pour into Meherabad on Thursdays, and Baba would give darshan and talk sometimes. And Tiffin means lunch. A lot of us who were there in the 70s, 80s sometimes, would associate it with these metal canisters in which the lunches would get put. And so we thought a tiffin was a canister. But actually the tiffin is the lunch. That's what it means. So Thursday lunch lectures. And what Baba would do during this period, especially 1926, was on Thursdays with the Mandali, he would walk over to anyway, it's actually not located here, but this is the family quarters. It's actually over on the edge of Arangown village. It was brought into this map just so that it could be shown. But Baba would walk there where Kaka Shahane was, and presumably the Mandali would get snacks and lunch and stuff like that, which was a big deal in those days, because as they like to say, the diet in those days was dal and rice, and then for variation, rice and dal. That's what they would always say, and vegetable. So I imagine that they probably would get given nice tasty food and, hard physical work. So it was probably an enjoyable occasion. And Baba then would hold forth on some talk or another. So that's where the title comes from. It's right from the manuscript itself. We were thinking of calling it Thursday Tiffin Lectures, but wound up calling it just Tiffin Lectures. Yeah. It's a mix. English and Gujarati. And although we have no direct evidence on the matter, the presumption that I bring to this that makes sense is that he probably recorded it in the language that Baba gave it. Because Chanji was fully fluent in both languages, and if Baba was talking in English, there would have been no reason for him to write it down in Gujarati and vice versa. And in things like In God's Hand, in Baba's handwriting, we see him alternating between English and Gujarati. But they were fully fluent because it was the British Raj. And this class of people would have been the sorts of people running the businesses and in frequent contact with the political establishment. So it was Indian English. There's a whole style of English spoken in India, but they were completely conversant in it. Throughout India, that's just the name for Thursday. Thursday is actually Thor's day. We're dedicating it to Thor. But I dare say there might be some of you who don't take an hour to worship Thor on Thursdays. But it's just the name for Thursday. But it was taken seriously, at least in those days, and the people would tend to go to Meherabad on Thursdays, yeah. Yeah, I don't know the origin of that. I've never thought to inquire. Yeah, and that was Another aspect of Meherabad in the 20s, during this period, was that there were a lot, I mentioned this, there are a lot of pilgrims coming. As I mentioned, 50,000 came for the birthday on that year. And another dynamic that was going on that I didn't really mention was with Erangown village. Of course, Baba started the school recruiting kids from Erangown, including some of the Mahar children. And these are really, outcasts at the time. And there was this whole drama that played itself out where some of the parents, some of the older Mahars, were committing vandalism at Meherabad at this time. They would cut up strips of meat and leave them out strewn throughout Meherabad at night, and that was highly offensive to Hindus. It was like a real insult. You can imagine, like in our culture, if you did some sort of a gross racial insult, be that kind of thing. And Baba would then call them in and say, "Take your children back," and berate them, and they would say, no, we'll make sure it doesn't happen anymore. And Baba would keep the children, and all this dramas were playing itself out. And also Baba, during this period, was working with some of the caste and religious issues with his own mandali. They weren't so, orthodox as to be, think that Babas would have just Hindus or Zoroastrians. It wasn't as much as that, but they had certain habits. They wanted to undiet, say, or certain prag days that people of religions wanted to honor. So Baba was working with all of that very intensively during this period. So it seems like caste and religious issues were a lot of what he was doing then. This period from the middle of the 20s for the next couple of years was a period of intensive discoursing on Baba's part. In fact, we have an entry in the leading diary of the period called the Combined Diary, which has, on July 10th, 1926, the first anniversary of Baba's silence, that talks a lot about this. In fact, it gives a long description of some significant dictation that Baba had been given at that period. And I myself would rate it at a 90% probability that it's talking about infinite intelligence there. But it also says that before Baba began his silence, he would give discourses from time to time. But after starting his silence, he really began giving discourses when it became extremely difficult. And in fact, it reached a real crescendo, say April, May, June 1926. We have in Chanji's diaries a lot more of these kinds of talks than ever found their way into this. So there'll have to be later, subsequent volumes compiling some of that material. But Baba was talking to the Mandali every day, a lot. And from about, in the diaries from in about June or July, Baba starts saying, I'm going to not give these talks anymore. Enough of you guys. And he did slow down, and they become less frequent, so that really, by the end of the year, they had, that phase was over. So I don't think, maybe I'll find out later that I'm wrong about this, but I don't think that Baba ever again gave discourses to the Mandali as he did in this time. So this was really a peak where there his focus. Now, there's a lot, here are some of the literary works or discourse activities that were going on during this period. I'll just run the list. The book, In God's Hand, Infinite Intelligence, the Tiffin Lectures, Shri's Explanation and Creation in the Universe, and then a publication began, The Mere Message, a monthly magazine that ran for 3 years. Do you have this at the Meherabad archives or any of this? Anyway, it's a very valuable item. But the first of these, the most important of them, of course, is the book, which Baba began. Anything strike you about this date, 13th July 1925? 3 days after he began his silence, he started writing the book. And he continued through November or maybe December 1926. And you happen to know what happened like on the 2nd of January 1927? He stopped writing. So this period of writing the book coincided precisely with the only time that Baba was writing with chalk on slate. And as soon as he finished the book, he stopped writing, and then the alphabet board came into the picture. So most of the Tiffin lectures are given through the medium of chalk on slate. And the book, Baba, I'll read a bunch of quotes about it in a minute. In fact, let's look at some of these things. So the book was handwritten by Meherabad at Mehrabad between July 13th, 1925 and December 1926. A lot of this was in the Jopari, that little hut there. Some of it in that little cabin in the side arbor that I showed you pictures of. Some of it he did in the Hazrat Babajan school, and also in the water tank, which is now Mayor Retreat on the hill. He did some of the writing there. Here are some of the comments Baba made about it. So, if you have it at Meherabad, it's time to come out with it. Come on, Lois. At your next meeting, let it out. That was written on paper, yeah. Mm-hmm. Padre Errico Nadell recalled Padre having said it was written on foolscap paper, a certain kind of paper, in either black or blue pen. That's what Padre remembered. The big book that I have written will be the future Bible, Koran, Avesta, and Veda, as it will be universally accepted by all castes and creeds. I have left the use of pen and stopped writing after finishing this great work. Hence it has force. So he stopped writing almost right away after finishing the book. While explaining to Dasturji, this would be KJ Dastur, one of the Mandali who became the editor of the Mayor Message, certain points about the work he was compiling, Shri, again, they would refer to him in those days as Shri. It's Honorable Sir. I don't know how you translate it, something like that. Again, referred to his own work and conveyed, never before have spiritual secrets been revealed in such a way as I have written them. The Hindu scriptures, the Upanishads, no doubt touch some points here and there and explain them to a certain extent not found in other scriptures. But I have revealed spirituality in direct and clear terms, explaining all in plain language. This work will be the universal scripture for the world in the future. So that was in 1927. Actually, this is the very day that the final talk in the Tiffin lectures is dated, August 30th, 1927. And the Combined Diaries itself have their last entry, August 31st, 1927. So a lot of stuff is getting wrapped up then. Now, this is when Baba was in Lonavala, right at the end of the first long stay. Lonavala is in the mountains between Bombay and Pune. There's a hill station there, and Baba stayed there for a couple of weeks at this time. Dada Chanji was the only member, that is, of the Mandali, who seemed to be at work at the typewriter, tapping out Baba's recent explanations the whole afternoon. Referring to these explanations, and some of these could be Tiffin lectures, I think, probably were. Shri was understood to have conveyed today that though they were found to be so very interesting, they were nothing in comparison with the 300 pages of notes that Shri had put down with his own hand at Meherabad. All these 300 pages are again merely short points, which, when fully developed, will cover volumes, and they are all full of secrets which have so far never been divulged by any saint or prophet, added Baba. That's an interesting description of what's there. Don't. No, Bao did say that, and I'm very convinced it isn't. I could say a little bit more about that in a minute. But that's an open question. One of Baba's mandali thought it was from the book. It is in Baba's handwriting, so it's quite unique in that way. So we'll look at that in a minute. On another occasion, so this is 1952, when Baba was up in Scarsdale, that's up north of New York City, after the accident, before flying back to Europe and then India. Ivy, that would be Ivy Deuce, drove to Scarsdale to see Baba, and at one point asked, Baba, are we ever going to know more about Jesus' life? We have no knowledge of what happened between the time he was 12 and when he was 30. Baba smiled and slyly added, it is in the book, typo there. Are we ever going to have a chance to read that book, Ivy asked. Baba nodded. But Rano tried to pin him with an exact answer. You see, Rano is one of the resident mandali, and when you're one of the resident mandali, you don't miss opportunities like this, because Baba will answer Ivy Deuce where he won't answer you. So, in this life, Baba? And again, Baba nodded. Yes. So, there's another comment. Irene Conybeare. You know Irene Conybeare. She was one of she became associated with Baba in the 40s. Daughter of a professor and a very intellectual type. Wrote several books, Civilization and Chaos and In Quest of Truth, at least those two. Being the inquisitive sort, took advantage of the fact that in Mehrabad, Baba was not surrounded by a crowd of thousands to ask him certain questions. How old is Adam? Was one question. She was the kind of person to ask things like this. Baba smiled and gave this reply. If I answer that the first man came on this earth 84 million years ago, what would that mean to you? So what does that mean? I don't know. But the whole explanation will make you understand how the first man evolved, and how this first evolved man has been repeatedly, millions of times, appearing not only on this earth, but millions of earths. And so he is ageless, timeless. But all this has to be explained properly. The book, which I have personally written when I had just stopped speaking, and which I wrote in 1 year, and which now lies in the bank to be touched only when I order, explains this point clearly. It is important for the world and the scientists to know, and therefore I have explained about cycles, the position of the earth for realization, the earth dying, and simultaneously the evolution of another earth, not any other planet. When was the first human being evolved? When was the first realized being? Whether the chicken or the egg came first? All has been written in detail in that book.
Oh, he says it's in the bank. What does that mean?
It was put in a safety deposit box in a bank in Bombay. I think Ramju Abdullah. You know, I've never collected this history. Has anybody else done so? But I think then Baba had, I think it was Ramju, get it out of that bank vault and bring it back to him. And I have never really collected all this history, as I say, but I do remember Erich saying that shortly before Baba dropped the body, Erich asked him, what about the book? And Baba said, it has been taken care of. So Yeah.
That's a strange phrase, not any other planet. Yeah. Does that mean anything to you?
Yeah. One thing, remember that what gets written out here is how somebody took it down and happened to write it out. But I think what he's probably referring to is the fact that there is a certain function, the Earth, and even if a planet dies, that function moves and becomes associated with another planet. So there always is a planet, the Earth, which is where the avatar comes and where the spiritual hierarchy is located. And
like not just in the...
Yeah, it's actually, yeah. There is a spiritual significance to the Earth. And where Baba says that, what is this, about millions of times, has repeatedly millions of tides appeared not only on this Earth. Well, obviously there would have been many, many planets, millions of them, over the course of the countless eons, which would have played this function. And I would presume that you would need to have human beings evolve on each planet. It'd have to happen. So there must be a first man, a first woman on every planet. In fact, there are 18,000 planets now with human life. So I presume that there must have been the first one in all those planets too. So it's something that happens over and over again.
I believe Baba said that the avatar was the first soul and the first realized soul. So it sounds like referring to the avatar in that case.
Well, maybe. But let's suppose there's some other planet of the 18,000 that's, doesn't have any spiritual connection, and human beings take birth there. You'd have to have an evolution that would lead to that point there too, even though that planet is just one of the 18,000. But one of the reasons why I personally don't believe that infinite intelligence or any other thing we have is the book is that none of these topics are covered there. I haven't seen. I'd like to know about cycles. It keeps coming up. And Baba keeps referring to them but never explains what they are. Now this is from God Speaks, where there's a reference to the book. Now this is from the 10 States of God, written by Erich. By the way, we just found Dr. Ghani's manuscript that he wrote in the late 40s. When Baba started dictating, and then Ghani didn't finish, so Baba started over after the new life and dictated God Speaks. We found that manuscript, and the first draft of the 10 States of God was written by Ghani. And that was a real surprise.
Where did it look the same? Is it the same explanation?
Some of it, the verbiage is so close that Erich must have used it. It's word for word the same. Other parts differ, but it's clearly a first draft. Yeah. Or it's clearly a draft of the same thing. No doubt about that at all. It's exactly the same in a lot of things. Yeah, Rosie? Did you want to?
Where do you keep finding things? Where are you finding them? There's only so much land.
I know. Well, last year at Avatar's Abode, when no one was looking, I got a shovel and went out. There it was.
Are they coming from other sources?
Actually, this was part of the Trust archives. There's all sorts of stuff there that no one has identified. So that just...
And did they invite you to part?
Well, I was, they were shown scans of a bunch of stuff, and I looked at it and said, holy smokes, this must be Ghani's book. I have it right on this computer. It's a very, very interesting book here. I know, that was a real surprise.
So who are these people that are determining what's valuable in their archive?
Well, mostly they're not doing that at all. They're just trying to get it preserved. See, that's the thing. But no, that's one of the big questions. What is really significant and what isn't? And I think that item is a significant one. Ghani, he was one of the close Mandali and was extremely brainy and extremely lazy. And very, very funny. One of Baba really liked him so much. And he was also, probably of all the Mandali, the one most interested in things like God Speaks content, I would say. Of all of them, by far the most. So now this is then Erich's chapter. This is on evolution. The details of this evolution of form are extremely complex. There are, for example, certain species of stone, metal, plant, and animal that have what Meherbaba has described as a special seat in evolution. Elsewhere, this is given the name Barzak, which is a Arabic term, which with a lot of resonances beyond just this. These key species of forms are mostly those that are milestones on the evolutionary road, and they mark the first and the last of a certain general class of species of forms. For example, the first species of bird form to follow the last species of fish form, and the first species of animal form, that would be a kangaroo actually, to follow the last species of bird form, have a special seat significance in evolution. Meherbaba tells us that this whole theme has been explained down to the last detail in his own book that is still to be handed over to the world. I don't know, maybe you have it at Meherabad. Hiding it. Buzz and Ginger took off with it because they want to read it. Yeah, they're reading it right now. Okay, so those are some things on Baba's book, which is the most important of all these things, but the only people who have read from it, Adi read a couple pages once, and as I heard, they asked him what was in it and he didn't remember. And Mahatma Gandhi also was given a few pages. And there was a woman in Australia who was asked to type out something from it to Clarissa Adams or somebody. I have to get that.
John said he read a few pages too.
Baba's brother?
He said he helped Baba hold also some things about was drawing lines. He helped him hold the ruler and other things. Also read a few pages.
Drawing lines on the page, you mean?
Yeah, I guess they're charts, perhaps.
So what was in it?
He didn't remember.
He didn't remember either. Yeah, I know. It's one of these secrets. Okay, so In God's Hand it was published in the year 2000, and it was a handwritten manuscript in Baba's own autograph. That 39 pages in pencil, and I just wrote this up. Subjects, we studied this at Marana. We had a 9-day program at Marana. We spent 2 sessions on this book. Illuminationism, relations between the real I, false I, mind, body, and universe, wakefulness, dream, and sound sleep. I could say a great deal about all of those things. Natural light, natural darkness, unnatural light. Those terms come up there. And this is on the title page. And this says, Explanations of Spirituality in Baba's Own Hand, probably written in 1925. And this is Ramju Abdullah's handwriting. So among the many reasons why I myself, here are some of the reasons why I don't feel that this is in the book. One reason is that one of the things we always hear about the book is how carefully Baba controlled it. The access to it was given to almost no one. It was always under lock and key. There was a phase where there was a trunk being carried around by Khorshid, and we don't know the book was in it, but it sounds likely. She could never let it touch the ground. She could never let it out of her sight, etc., etc., etc. So how is it that the first 39 pages somehow got separated and nobody ever noticed that fact, you know? That's one improbability. Also, Ramju Abdullah was one of the people who was most interested in this kind of thing, he and Ghani, I would say, and who was very much in contact, who was there at the time when the book was being written, and who had a lot to do with this being put in a bank vault. So if he wrote this, why would he say probably written in 1925? Wouldn't he know? And if 39 pages got separated, well, how exactly did that happen, right? On a book that was being cared for so carefully. And might he not have said, you know, I really ought to get the first 39 pages back together with the rest of the book? You know, mightn't that have crossed his mind while he was writing this little note there? It doesn't make any sense in this and many other ways. Whereas the alternate explanation is that Baba was writing in those days, and he just wrote this out one day. So anyway, I could go on for a long time. There's quite a case to be made, in my opinion, against it being the book. But this is what it looks like. Here's the first page. You can see there. By the way, here's another reason why this little lit there, that was Adi's filing system. It means literature. It would be kept in that section. So this would suggest it was kept in Adi's files for a certain period of time. The first 39 pages of the book, they just stick it in the files and write lit on it, you know, like that. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, this is one of Baba's diagrams. When I get to put in my nomination for the 1001 titles for Avatar Meherabad, one of mine will be Chartwala, Meherbaba Chartwala, because when he wanted to explain topics like this, he always used charts, and these are very significant charts. So there's a little bit about In God's Hand. This is also, in our estimation, from this period. This is the book published on basis of what we call the intelligence notebooks. Those are the source manuscripts, 2 volumes. This is Tiffin lectures, by the way, Thursday Tiffin lectures. That's what it looks like, the original manuscript. And the original manuscript is unsigned and unattributed. That is to say, we don't have a mention on it that it was written by Meherabad. So the case has to be made that it was written by him. I've written many things on this and could talk for hours easily on the subject, but I did write an article in the Glow. I feel that the evidence that this derives from a dictation of Meher Baba's is overwhelming. There are many, as a textual case to be made for it. It's just simply overwhelming that it comes from him. I think it's the Mandali's write-up of a series of dictations, that Baba gave. A series of dictations that Baba gave probably between about April and June or July 1926. And there's a particular diary entry that would give those dates. The other stuff we have is In God's Hand. This is his handwriting, yeah. This is, we don't know the handwriting. Could be one of the Mandali, we still have to ascertain. But yes, because he was writing during that period, as we know. That was his means of communicating with people. So it seems to me there would be no reason why he wouldn't have just written something out. Nobody would especially have noticed it in those days because he was doing it all the time. But this, I think, we talked about this at Marana, and I can make a long case for it. I think it is a carefully composed write-up by Baba's Mandali based on a very extensive dictation that he gave. There's as I say in the combined diary, there's a long description of just such a dictation at just this time. And I personally think that that's describing the dictation of this. A sustained metaphysical treatise with significant content not found in any of Meher Baba's other writings. There's really material here we would have no idea of it if we didn't have this book. It's not even in any of the other stuff from the 1920s. And I would call it's Infinite Intelligence is, in its main part, a sustained, unified work, a sustained treatise. It makes me think of God Speaks in that way. That's the only other literary work like that we have from Meher Baba. It developed, especially through the very end, it makes me wonder if it's if Baba didn't just drop it off unfinished. But up until then, Baba is really developing in a very recognizable pattern. And there's no other book by him like that except for God Speaks. So it's similar in that way. It has ideas, some of them you will find them in God Speaks and later works, like the divine theme and things like that. But other stuff is completely unique to this work. So it's a work of great significance. And this is the source, the Intelligence Notebooks, we're calling it. And this is clearly what is called in India a fair copy. That is, somebody writing out in a good handwriting a composed final draft. And if you look at it, you can see why. Obviously, these would not be the notes somebody was taking while listening to Meher Baba dictate, right? It would never look like this with such a carefully drawn chart. So I'm sure that the notes would have been taken down maybe by Chanji at first, recomposed and written up in a certain form, and then this was a final copy made by somebody. Maybe Vishnu, he's a candidate. Here are some other pages of the thing. Okay, there's a lot more. Yeah, here's a chart that we found separately, but that very clearly relates to infinite intelligence. Quite explicitly it does. Here's one of the diagrams in the source manuscript. You see, it's very nicely done, carefully done. And this is how these were reworked. Now we come to the Tiffin lectures. So the book is based on a 174-page typed manuscript and various other manuscript sources. It's ultimately derived from Chanji's diary. In the greater part of them, we have the diary sources and know this for sure. And the rest of it, the diaries are missing after middle of October, so we don't have explicit sources, but there's no reason to doubt that the same isn't true for them too. The published book has 52 selected talks to the Mandali, usually at Meherabad, between April 29th, 1926 and August 30th, 1927. These lectures do not comprise a unified and sustained series, but were occasionally delivered. That is, delivered on this occasion or that occasion, not part of a regular scheduled program. They represent the Gyan, intellectual knowledge, aspect of the training Baba gave to his early men Mandali. So that's what the book looks like. There it is. So there's the Dharmashala, the old bungalow, as we call it, Lower Meherabad. We saw this photo earlier, right? This is from the seclusion cabin in what had been the Sai Darbar. This is right between the Ahmednagar highway, Ahmednagar-Erangown downed highway, and the railway tracks, where today there's nothing except trees and historical markers. This is the manuscript that was found at Meherabad, and this is a sample typed page. Nicely done, you know, like that. I'm looking for a lacuna. I don't see any at the moment. And this is a sample of Chanji's diary. This is a particularly messy page. I gave it to illustrate that. A lot of this he was just doing as a rush. I, by Svarg, mean the gaining of truth that is already the property of everyone. The spiritual something or other, I can't quite read it. As for the political independence, no doubt India will gain it in the future. There is no need to worry about it. So this is to a bunch of politicians who showed up that day. And here you see here's one of the original diagrams right there. And this modulates from English into Gujarati all over the place. When
correlate this to the finished type stuff?
you are talking about years of my life, yes. Oh God, this manuscript, especially in the form I originally got it, was completely disordered. The pages were totally out of order. And it so happens that even if the pages were in order, you wouldn't know it, you know. It's kind of a working manuscript, and he would throw in notes all over the place. It was quite chaotic. But the pages were totally out of order. So finally, after 15 years, I was staying at someone's house in Asheville, and I printed out, and also when they did the original scans, they didn't scan a lot of the pages that were blank. So I had to reconstitute the manuscript. So I printed out every page, and I had a week in somebody's downstairs living room, and I spread all the pages out across the floor, filled the entire big living room, and crawled around. And I would look for that little blip there. What other page on the opposite side would have the same thing? Or that exact curve there, or that there? And, you know, and some of the pages were missing. You know, not there at all. But I had guessed it, so I'd say blank page is probably here. And it took me an entire week to kind of reconstitute the manuscript.
You found it?
Yes, this is Chanji's diaries, yeah. But of course, one of the things was, you know, when you're doing research like this, it's not like you can say, the Tiffin Lectures source book for scholars in the subject. Please go to Chanji's diary number 57, folio 7, where you know, in other words, there was no reason to know that there was anything in here at all. And a lot of it was in Gujarati, which I don't read. So I went through the entire, it took years doing this. And I would go through a page of Gujarati and I'd say, there are 4 English words. And then I'd go through the entire Tiffin Lectures to find where those 4 words could be found at that distance. Can you imagine how much time this took? And I was able to figure out where those probably related. And then finally, somebody who was fluent in Gujarati came to help, and we went through it all and sourced it all. It was a huge job. That's why it took so long. There's the sources. And, okay, now here are some other things from this period. The combined diary. This is written by 5 of the Mandali, Padri, Pawar, Pandoba, Nadir Shah, and Chanji, from July end 1924 to August 31st, 1927, about 750 handwritten pages in 2 volumes. And what it is a detailed and carefully composed day-to-day account of Baba's activities over this period, the most important and accurate original source of Baba's life over these 3 years. And in Tiffin Lectures, you'll see a lot of quotes from the combined diary. Here's what it looks like. So this is a major, it's not Baba's discourses or Baba's words, although sometimes those are described, but it's a history of the period, and it's really a careful job by the Mandali. And this is, I've been mentioning this particular entry, 10th July 1926, and here it is. Okay, now there's other things from later. This is from the Premashram, or the beginning of the Premashram period. And this is what I'm working on right now. It's the main project. Shri's Explanations on Creation in the Universe is the title on the manuscript. 34 talks between December 2nd, 1927 and January 14th, 1928, delivered by Meherbaba from his crypt room, which is now his samadhi, in Upper Mehrabad, to the Meher Ashram boys and the assembled Meherabad community. This would be, if you're looking into the main door of the samadhi, the window to the right, Baba would be sitting there, and out that window would be giving these discourses to the community and the boys who were gathered there, usually in the evenings. The end of December witnessed the eruption of love that brought about the Premashram in early 1928. The talks deal with primordial cosmology and the creation of the universe. They also provide detailed descriptions of the planes of consciousness. I think it would have been, I'm sure that Mera and the women would not have, they were completely in seclusion. You see, we haven't yet really been able to find out who took these notes. Very likely, Baba would have been using English because a lot of the kids are from Iran and they wouldn't have been Marathi or Gujarati speakers. I would guess it probably got translated into different languages, but I haven't seen a description that mentions that. But although these talks are not that long, they're amazing. They are knockout talks. Baba was explaining to these kids stuff he had never explained to the Mandali. I mean, really primordial cosmology, things that you've never imagined, I'm sure. And about the planes, stuff that is not in God Speaks. And of course, it was practical knowledge for them, because at the very time he dictated them, a bunch of them started experiencing the planes. So that's what I would call good students, huh? I don't know, John, do you have students like that?
Not like that.
Here's what the third plane is like. Yes, sir. I go right there. That's what happened, actually. So it's a most extraordinary series of talks. Not all that long, but boy, power-packed. Eric?
All the boys, or just the Premashram?
This would have been all of them, because the Premashram didn't exist yet. It's because of what happened while it was right during, in fact, it was the very week that Baba was talking about the planes that whole thing happened among them. So, really extraordinary. Yeah. This is what one of the pages, it's typed with handwritten supplementation, as you can see. These are what the pages look like that. So that's my current project right now, this time. You may not have heard of Divine Knowledge Publishers, but you're going to hear about it now. Divine Knowledge Publishers was created by Meherababa on 21st February 1929 with an office in the Tata Lecture Hall in the Hill. Its members were Dastur, English, Chanji, Gujarati, Manikar, Marathi, Ramju in Urdu, and Rausab, Persian, recently returned from Persia. Rausab wrote the Meher and Premashram, on the Meher and Premashrams, Kashful Hakayak, the revelation of truth. Have any of you read this?
Kashful Hakayak.
Okay. Have you read it?
No, I've seen the book though.
Yeah. Yes. And now, Dastur on the 1st of January, the first issue of the Meher Message came out, which is this, a monthly serial publication issued from Nasik from January 1929 to the end of 1931, edited by K.J. Dastur, a disciple who turned against Meher Baba in 1931. He became one of his denunciators. Issues ran to an average of 70 to 100 pages, articles and other literary items by various authors. And there are a bunch of series of articles attributed to Meher Baba, including spiritual speeches of Sri Meher Baba. 2/3 of these are from the Tiffin lectures, although they were so drastically edited that it's hard to see that. And this is what they look like. So once a month, it was good quality stuff, I'd say. Published in 1933 by Ramju Abdullah, which collects and compiles and synthesizes from the Meher Message articles. And that, then, is the early Meherabad period. So this afternoon we'll start up with looking at the Tiffin lectures proper. So Jai Baba.